Hey, Monica.
So, Jen, I think the vast majority of us have experienced the feeling of just being stuck in life, whether that's stuck in an unfulfilling routine, work, or relationship, or just needing to get out of our own way. I would go so far to say that's a pretty universal experience that everybody has felt at some time.
Yes, it's definitely something I've experienced many times in my own life.
So, our guest today is going to help us get unstuck. She's actually somebody whose own personal experience of being stuck and then getting unstuck catapult her into a new, totally different career path where nature and adventure are really taking center stage. We had so much fun with this interview, and we can't wait to share it with our listeners.
Yes, so today we're beyond excited to be chatting with Shelby Stanger. Shelby is the host of REI's Wild Ideas Worth Living podcast and the author of a fabulous book called Will to Wild. Both these projects explore stories of people who have completely transformed their lives as they're seeking adventure out in nature.
One of the things we talk about with Shelby is there is so much more out there nowadays about changing your life, right? Self help on social media, psychedelic retreats, to everything in between. And sometimes it can all start to feel like a little bit of noise. But Shelby is a firm believer that simply getting outside is the fastest way to shift your perspective and kickstart your journey to change or self discovery.
And I love that the stories in her book are generally these pretty bold examples of people really seeking major outdoor adventures. But she's quick to say that you don't have to climb Everest or hike the Pacific Crest Trail to have these transformative experiences, and smaller adventures are just as valid.
So, in this conversation, we talk about the power of awe, a few particularly inspiring stories, and the magic you can find out on the trails.
Okay, so let's get to our interview with Shelby Stanger.
Hey, Shelby. I know we're so excited to have you today.
I'm excited to be here. You ladies seem amazing, and I love that you have like a podcast all about nature and more.
That's why we were attracted to what you were doing because it all sort of works together. We are super excited about the book. I absolutely adore it and super inspirational, great stories. But before we dig into that, we want to know, who is Shelby?
I'm a surfer, I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and I'm someone who's always believed that a little adventure, especially in nature, is life's antidote to success, to soul seeking, to finding answers that aren't clear cut on paper.
I think that's to our core, Monica. That's exactly how we feel. It's just like, because nature is the antidote, especially for everything that's going on in the world. We need that antidote every single day. But how did you? I mean, where did you grow up where you kind of found that way within nature? What was your background like?
So I'm a lucky kid. I grew up always by the beach in San Diego in a town called Cardiff by the Sea. But my parents weren't outdoorsy at all. They never camped. They never hiked. Like their idea of camping was like getting a hotel somewhere in Palm Springs, which was not camping. But my father passed away when I was young, 11 years old, of a sudden heart attack. He was a dentist. He didn't know. So there was like no preparation, no life insurance, no anything. And it was pretty shocking to the whole town. He was a real big part of the town we lived in called Cardiff by the Sea, which is now this like hipster surf community. I mean, I took with that life was short and you never know. But also at the same time, my mom sent me to this amazing water sports camp that summer. She was a single mom. And in the mornings, you would take surfing or kayaking or sailing or windsurfing or water skiing. And then in the afternoon, you would do all these activities. And I found surfing and I loved it. And I was usually one of the only girls and I was not good at it. I had absolute terrible style, but always an epic smile. And I think I realized that in the water, I started to get a lot of answers that I couldn't get anywhere else. You know, my mom was really cool. She sent me to a counselor and we talked about things. She was a social worker, but like life just made more sense out in nature. And I think in the water, I was tricked into dealing with things and I learned a lot of lessons in the waves and it's fun and it gave me courage and it boosted my self-confidence. And then later on, I ended up teaching surfing at this first all-women surf school in the world, which was started by my favorite camp counselor at this very surf camp, Izzy Tihani and her sister Coco Tihani. And I was pretty young. I wasn't even that great of a surfer, but there was no surf schools for women at that time in 1996. And I just pushed women into waves on the weekend. And so women would come from all over San Diego, sometimes from farther places because it was the only school at the time. And they'd come for a weekend or a week-long clinic. And I would always get a call from at least one student about 3 weeks to 2 months to 3 months afterwards. And they'd say, Shelby, I quit my job, or I'm finally ending this relationship that I needed to end for good, or they're moving across the country or launching a business or just doing this radical change. And often they were moving closer to the beach to be by surfing because they loved it so much. But it was all after just a weekend surfing clinic. So I think there's something really extraordinary about, doing an adventure, but doing it outside in nature. It's like a synergistic effect. And so I became so obsessed with this thing that I ended up calling wild ideas that I ended up making it my life's work. So I ended up going to school for journalism, working at CNN, kind of by you guys in Atlanta. And then I worked for surf companies and adventure companies. And then I started a podcast that led me to this book and kind of led me to talking to you today. But yeah, I was always fascinated by this power of nature and adventure together, that synergistic effect of both of them, how it could catapult someone to massive change, but then how that change would keep going and going and going and going.
Do you think it's because also like your teachings were outside of four walls, that you were, people felt more free just to kind of be in the space of themselves openly without like being confined in four walls?
Yeah, I think there's something really magical about nature. One, it's like your perspective totally changes because you're not inside four walls of a classroom or an office. Like looking at a horizon, it's so good for your eyes and your brain, by the way, looking at horizons. You're physically just more expanded in a way that you could never be expanded inside four walls. But second, I think, so much of our life is predictable with cell phones, with maps, with pictures. And in nature, there's a lot of opportunity for the unpredictable and surprise. And we need that as part of our life as humans. Like we crave novelty and newness. And the biggest thing that nature provides is the chance to experience this really radical emotion called awe. And I think we all have experienced awe. It happens when you see a magical sunset, it can happen when you just hear an amazing song or see a baby for the first time. But it happens a lot in nature, like when you see a dolphin leap all of a sudden, or you see a bird fly through the sky and grab a worm. It stops you in your tracks. And there's no emotion I've ever experienced before that can change my state of mind faster than awe. Like there's no drug I can ever take that gets me out of my mood that might be sour before as fast as awe. So like if I was in a bad mood because I was sitting in traffic or I got in a fight with my boss or my partner or whatever, after I experience some magical awe, like the other day I saw a dolphin leap like this close to me, felt like I was at SeaWorld, I just forgot about everything. I immediately softened. I felt closer to the people around me. I think the biggest thing awe does is it helps you get out of your way, like whatever is keeping you in your own head, and allows you to expand and go after these really wild ideas without a wall.
Can you talk a little bit about your own? Because you were in Emory. You were saying, in the book, went to school in Georgia, did a little bit of CNN, went home, and kind of got a dream job with Vans, right? And as a California kid, like big fan, like, and they had that crazy. I don't know if they're still doing that, the kind of really cool festival, and you got to work on that, right? Yeah. And so, but you did that for I'm not sure how many years, but at some point you hit a wall and said, this isn't what I want to do anymore. Can you talk a little bit about where you were, how you, in a sense, got unstuck and created your own adventure from there? Because I think that's a really interesting story.
Well, this was 2009. I was 29 years old. It was the height of the recession, and I had this dream job. Like I got to work with the son of the guy who founded Vans, Steve Van Dorn, who's just like the most awesome person. And the people at Vans are beautiful people. But at the time, you had to work in an office. You couldn't work from home. There was no flexible schedules. And I would have to drive in awful traffic. And the biggest thing is I just didn't see myself growing at the company. And even bigger is I just wanted to write stories about adventurers going for it. And so I got really stuck and depressed and upset. And I didn't realize it. But depression runs really deep in my family. And I didn't think it could happen to me in 2009. Look, we talk about mental health now a ton in society, and I think it's way more acceptable to talk about it. People are dealing with it. It's really cool. But back then, I was like, nope, I'm an athlete. I can just will this away. And it was a hard period of my life. And eventually I got the courage to quit this job to go after my own wild idea, which was to tell stories of people pursuing wild ideas as a journalist. But that wasn't an easy time of my life. It came with a lot of hiccups and a lot of struggle. And yeah, it was scary, but I got through it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are fearful of change because it's scary and we're on a path. The path seems safe. We're following the rules. Back to the four walls, Jen, your time in nature and being in the surf, right? I feel like, was that part of the story? I'm trying to remember like how you finally were like, this is it.
First of all, I had to realize that I was stuck. And you can read that part of the book where I basically peed my pants over the age of 7. There were some things that happened that just were signs. And in nature and hiking, we have these things called trail signs. And trail signs will show us if we're going the right way and we might see a waterfall. And they also show us when we're going to get to a dead end. And I was hitting a lot of dead end trail signs, like metaphorically in life. And I had no choice but to start listening to the trail signs. And eventually there was this wave right by the Laguna Art Museum in front of it in Laguna Beach where I was living that was really scary, called Rock Pile. And to make this wave, you had to take off between 2 rocks. And if you messed up, you'd hit a rock, which was like really scary. But the day I finally got the courage to take off on that wave and caught the wave, I was like, that's it. I'm quitting my job. And I don't recommend people to quit their job anymore. Like, this was 2009, 2023. You can keep your job. You can do side hustles. You can do wild ideas as well. But at the time, like, that was my only choice. And so I think what happened was that time in nature, getting this extreme amount of courage, doing something scary, catapulted me to make this change.
I think also probably the idea of you doing all of your time outside before you had to like shift. I think that teaches you resilience. I'm sure. Like I think nature teaches us resilience regardless, whether we realize it or not, but helps us kind of go through those trails and say, okay, that is a dead end. Now I got to go some other way. I got to figure it out. So what happened next?
Well, the minute I made that decision to quit
Yeah.
my job, I got a phone call. And the phone call was from a publicist that I had told that I was thinking about quitting my job and think of me should she have any story ideas. I'd gone to school for journalism. It was my dream to be a journalist. I'd done it. And then, it's hard to make money as a journalist, gave it up to do marketing. And then I wanted back in. And she called me and she said, "Hey, Shelby, I know you're thinking about leaving. There's this opportunity to go on a boat trip to Indonesia with these guys, but they're all guys, but they're going to surf these remote waves and they're going to be the first to stand up paddle some of them." And the journalist backed out. "Would you like to go?" And I was like, "Yes, please." And at first she's like, "Okay, I got to make sure they'll accept you because they really want a guy." But I told her, I hung on the Vans Warped Tour and I could hang. And I was like, I want nothing to do with these 60-year-old men. Like, pick me. And eventually I got to go on this trip with these legendary surfers. One of them is a famous Hawaiian lifeguard, literally linked to Hawaiian royalty. Another guy is a famous boat captain who founded many of these waves off these islands in Indonesia called the Mentawais. And it was just really amazing playing on a bigger playground, but out in the most remote vastness of untrammeled land that I've ever seen in my life. Like, there's no greater wilderness than the middle of the ocean. And, I thought I was just going to have to cover these guys as a journalist, but I was on a boat the whole time while they were surfing these really big waves. And eventually I was like sick of sitting on the boat where I was just getting seasick. I had to literally drop in on these waves myself. And, it wasn't pretty, but eventually, I caught some waves, and that trip catapulted me for probably the next 10 years. It was such a life-changing, magical journey. There were so many times where I experienced awe, and I built so much courage pushing myself out of my comfort zone, but also I was just in the middle of this wilderness. I had all this time to think, to process, to be quiet. And I've interviewed the science writer Florence Williams and spent a lot of time with a bunch of different nature scientists. Yeah, and we know that in nature, our nervous system relaxes, our immunity boosts. We're able to make decisions faster. I think there's a really cool study by the Kaplans that talk about, I don't know if you've had them on your podcast, but it's soft versus hard fascination. So hard fascination is like when your cell phone rings and you're physically forced to answer it, or you see a red light and so you have to stop. Well, soft fascination is like when you watch waves and your eyes are forced to wander, or you see a bird and you just kind of watch it wander as well, or you see leaves rustling through the trees. Your mind kind of slows down, your eyes wander, and it allows you to be more creative. And you get into basically flow state. And I just experienced so much of that, that after that trip, I had so many creative ideas. And, I had been stuck and really depressed. I didn't take medicine, and it just like propelled me for the next, like, really, I would say a couple of years, that trip.
At that point, you started, doing a lot more writing, but you hadn't started the podcast yet. And so I really think it's an interesting combination of getting out of the four walls, right? Getting out into nature, getting outside yourself, right? And I think that's where the awe comes in. But then thinking about these adventures. And I know, I think you're great in the book because you say, listen, you don't have to go to Indonesia, because I think there's a little bit like, okay, Shelby, whatever. I'm not going to
exactly.
Indonesia tomorrow.
Or Everest. Yeah.
But I think you're very clear that, you can find your mini adventures or your small adventures. But what sort of led you to do a podcast? I mean, even back then when you started it, they were, still fledgling, if you will. Like, I feel like we've been doing this for like 2-3 years and it's like we were late to the game, so, why podcast when you were a writer? Like, what led you to do that?
Well, the truth is, I really liked talking and interviewing people more than I liked writing. And magazines were shrinking and they were cutting word count. And like, I remember I did a story on Wim Hof, an early story on the Iceman Wim Hof, the breath guy, for an outdoor magazine. And it was like one of the first stories on him, and they cut it to make him sound smarmy. And I was pissed. And I was like, we had such a good conversation. He was such an interesting guy. I just want to tell his story in his own words. So it's not like edited with this really weird lens that's not my lens. And I was like, that's it. I'd really started listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast. He was an early podcaster and I loved his show, but he interviewed mostly tech people and guys. And I wished he'd interviewed more adventurers and more women. And I just had this idea to start a podcast, but I'm like, I have no idea how to work the tech. At that time, it was really tricky in 2015, 16. No one knew what these things are. You had to, it wasn't like it is today. And someone was like, hey, you should take this entrepreneurship class about how to start a business. And at the time, I was a business reporter. So I'd interviewed all these people starting businesses in the surfing and outdoor community, but I'd never started a business myself. And I was like, I'm not going to start another t-shirt company or another shoe company. I don't want to carry inventory. I don't want to clean bathrooms. Maybe I could start a media company and just like try it out as my first little business and see if I could sell it. And, when I was a little girl, I interned. My college professor was really smart. He's like, go back to your local newspaper and get an internship for them because they'll give you a ton of assignments. You'll get so much experience. You'll write about everything. And I did. And my local newspaper ended up letting me have my own adventure and surfing column that I pitched them. So basically, I took that same idea I had at 19 and like used that same idea that I had at 36 and turned it into a podcast that I called Wild Ideas Worth Living, where I'd interview people who took this path less traveled and made it a reality. And I wanted to learn how they did it and how they overcame mostly imposter syndrome and fear and how they dealt with failure, because that's something like not a lot of people were talking about. And I also wanted to showcase a myriad of adventures because let's face it, like I said, not everybody's going to go to Indonesia and I'm never going to climb Mount Everest. And I don't even like sleeping in a tent. I host a podcast for REI. I'm learning to like tents now, but I'm like 43. Yeah. Okay, cool. But everybody has their own Everest and adventure to climb. And I just wanted to create stories that inspired people to go for their wild idea, however wild it was to them. It could be a small wild idea or a big wild idea, but I believed it would have the same effect on them and allow them to have the courage to then change something in their internal life off of the proverbial trail that they did outside. And so, yeah, I started it in 2016. And immediately I was like, this would be awesome if REI subsidized it. So I found the person to pitch at REI, and I was like, you guys should sponsor my podcast because I know you have this campaign called Force of Nature. You're trying to get women outside. I'm a woman. I'm getting people outside. Like, they're like, great, Shelby, you sound enthusiastic, but we sell tents. We don't sell podcasts. And I was really bummed, but I had this strong why. I was like, I really want this podcast to work. So I didn't care that I got rejected by REI at first. I pitched other companies, and then I started pitching like 5 to 10 companies a day until people said yes. And people eventually said yes. And I had so much enthusiasm for what I was doing that people listened, and it was amazing. And I felt good about it. And, you know, I was spending all my own money, all my own time, and it was really scary, but I felt really good about what I was doing. And there are a lot of trail signs to tell me to keep going, even though it was scary. And that was the first thing I ever did in my life that, like, it was kind of easy. Like, things were moving and I wasn't hitting a lot of walls. Most things I do, I hit a lot of walls. Like, I've tried a lot of jobs. I've tried selling vitamins. I mean, I've tried all sorts of jobs and they didn't work. This one did, and it was stuck. And 6 months later, I went back to REI, and they actually wanted to talk, and they were getting into the podcast space. They licensed the show, and they ended up purchasing it 4 years later. So now it's their show, and I'm still the host. And it's been an awesome partnership because no other company gets people outside more than them. And part of getting outside is
good gear.
Yeah, it helps to have good gear and gear that works. You know, you don't have to have the most expensive gear, but gear can make a difference. And they're really good educators about actually getting outside. And so it's been really cool.
So in the book, you have amazing interviews, really inspiring stories. Are there a couple you want to share with us? I mean, it's a cool, the way the book is set up. You know, it's kind of a field guide or guidebook, if you will. And I will say, to our listeners, don't be intimidated by the tent on the cover. Don't think you have to be this outdoor adventurer to buy it. It is for everybody. It's a really inspiring story. And just sort of makes you rethink, where are my signposts, right? So with that said, and it looks like you want to tell me that maybe you weren't the cover choice.
I'm just laughing because, like, I fought with the publisher. I was like, I'm never going to sleep in that tent in the Arctic. Why are you putting that on the cover? Like, can we just have like a surfer?
It's a beautiful cover.
As a marketer, I'm like, it all works together, but I do want people to pick it up because it is really, I don't want to use self-help. It's a field guide for getting unstuck, and it really is cool.
But listen, there's a lot of ways that a lot of things you can try to change your life right now. People are trying everything. They're trying drugs, they're trying ceremonies, they're trying everything. But I think all you have to do is go outside in nature, go somewhere you can see stars, which make you feel small and yet more connected to people around you. And that will change your life. Like, these small doses in nature, like microdose nature or macrodose it. But either dose is going to give you an experience that's going to be magical, but without any negative side effects. Your side effects might even lead you to meeting your husband or a partner or a job, which has happened to me a million times out in nature. It's led to jobs. It's led to a lot of things.
There's so many great stories in here. Like, are there a couple that are kind of, you want to share with us that you felt like were particularly relevant?
I mean, my favorite is the oldest person I've ever interviewed, Dr. Edith Eger, who was a Holocaust survivor and really an unlikely person to be in this book. But I used her for this chapter called Have a Why. And I think when you have a wild idea, you're going to have a lot of naysayers and a lot of doubters. And the biggest doubter is going to be the one in your own head. Like, we're really hard on ourselves and we can think of a million reasons not to do something. But Edith is, you know, her why in Auschwitz in surviving Auschwitz was many reasons. She wanted to survive for her sister, but she also had a boyfriend. Like, your why might be simple as like wanting to see a love, or maybe it's love, or maybe it's lust, or whatever it is. Maybe it's joy. But what she says is self-love is not narcissistic. It's really important. and that we all have the choice to free ourselves from the prisons that we have in our own minds. She was in an actual prisons, but there's a prison that we all have in our own minds, and we have the choice, and that choice is within our own reach. She says the key is in our pocket. She just had so many wise things to say. I could spend years with her. I really liked this person that goes by Patty Gonia, and Patty is the alter ego of a photographer named Win Wiley who lives in Nebraska, and he was gay and he really loved the outdoors. He was an Eagle Scout, but one day he dressed in drag and he just felt so alive. And then he became Patty Gonia, and Patty became this amazing person that now gets invited to the Met Gala and has her own songs and a huge Instagram following. And I took them surfing, and she was really cool. And then, I interviewed some older women that I thought were really cool. One was a suburban mom who was a physical therapist and a mom, and, mostly a stay-at-home mom. And she started hiking when her husband moved to Europe for a job. And she wasn't very good at it, but she loved it. And she wondered if she could become a guide, which is a really wild idea at age 55. And especially because all of the guides she'd had were 25-year-old dudes. And she's over 55 now, guiding women up and down, maybe down, I don't know how that works, ice waterfalls. And she's an incredible woman. And I thought her story was interesting. I also have these friends, Ryan and Nicole Levinson, who left San Diego to sail to Tahiti. That's a big, wild idea. And they've been out at sea for the last 10 years, and they just sold their boat. But their story in the book about starting is really important, because they spent a lot of time getting their boat ready, and they got really scared to actually leave the dock. But Ryan told me that there's two types of sailors, those who leave the dock and those who don't. And you can let yourself be unready forever if you let yourself. And I think all of us, I'm a perfectionist and I can stall on projects a lot, but sometimes you just have to go and not. I talk about planning in this book a lot, but honestly, sometimes you just don't need to have too much of a plan. You just need to have a safety plan and then go, and you can't overthink it. And then, God, there's so many stories. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank, but there's a couple who skied to the Arctic. There's a group of grandmas that boogie board every 3 times a week. They're really cute. They're kind of just a sidebar, but they're adorable, and it's boosted their confidence. They share camaraderie. They talk about everything from their grandkids to their, some of them have survived cancer, and they keep going. But there's a lot of stories there. And then there's these 2 twins that are pretty radical. They paddled from Alaska to Mexico on paddle boards, which are like giant surfboards, using just their hands, and everything went wrong. And I think that their story is really funny, because in an adventure, something will go wrong. And it's how you handle when something goes wrong that sets you apart from other people. And one of those tools should be having a sense of humor, which really relates to life as well.
Again, we see, social media and culture, holds up people like, yay, look what they've accomplished. But we don't understand the story. We don't understand how they got here. And so it almost sets up this sort of false aspiration, because we just think, oh, well, how come I can't be that way? When it's like hard work, setbacks, funny things happen. But I do think that a couple of things that you said was like the Patty Gonia, or maybe it was the mom, the hiker, how she wasn't really good at it, but she just kept going. You don't have to be good at it. Like, none of us, like, if we're going to go out and hike, like, she ended up being a guide, but I don't need to be an expert. And even surfing, right? Like, I could go get on a board. That doesn't mean I have to enter a contest. But I think that there's a weird, there's a weird thing in the world where you have to be good. You have to be perfect. I wish we were easier on ourselves.
I think it's really great to suck at something, which is actually the title of a friend's book, Karen Rinaldi. She wrote this book called It's Great to Suck at Something. But I'm stealing her line because it really is great to suck at something. It's fun. Remember when you were a kid, you tried anything and you were terrible at it and you were bad at it and you loved it. Like right now, I'm trying this workout called Deep End Fitness, where we go to the bottom of the pool and we run with weights, and everybody else is like a collegiate swimmer. I have zero swim experience except for when I lose my surfboard and have to swim after it. I'm the worst one there. And I am loving it because I'm so bad and I have no expectations for myself. And I think a lot of us are perfectionists and high achievers. If they're listening to your podcast, or if you guys are, if you've gotten to a level of success, you're a high achiever and you probably take your work seriously and you probably are a little bit of a perfectionist. But when we can let that side of ourselves go and be more open to failure, which we're gonna fail in nature. Nature's just always gonna win. Like no matter how hard we try, nature wins. She beats everybody. It's really enjoyable to kind of suck and learn what we're made out of.
Yeah, I think life is just messy, and I think that's the best part that nature teaches us, and we can just fall into it and just say, okay, life is messy. This is where we are, and everything doesn't have to be perfect, like the Instagram, whatever. But I want to digress a little bit, but talk about something that we thought was really cool in the book about trail magic.
Trail magic and trail angels.
Yeah, yeah. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
This is a term that was created by hikers, mostly who through hike, which is like if they hike the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail. And trail magic is like happens when, when you're hiking out there and you run out of water and there's like a random bottle of water on the trail for you. Or, a lot of hikers really crave fresh fruit. And there's literally these people called trail angels that will go deep onto these trails with bags of fresh fruit and water and hand them to hikers. And there's a person that I interviewed who's a real life trail angel. It's a couple named Barney and Sandy Mann. They go by Scout and Frodo. They did the Pacific Crest Trail years ago and loved it so much and were so inspired by what it had done for them that they've become full-time trail angels, which means every year, because they live in San Diego, which is the start of the Pacific Crest Trail, they open their home to any stranger that signs up who wants to hike the PCT. They host them, they feed them, they have campfires where they educate them about the trail, and they charge them nothing. You're not even allowed to donate. What you have to do, though, is pay it forward. And that kindness just spreads and spreads like wildfire. And they're some of the most endearing. He was a lawyer, she was a school teacher. They don't have a big home. They have a home, but it's like nothing fancy. It's just a normal home on a cul-de-sac in like a normal neighborhood in San Diego. And they do this out of the goodness of their heart because they say they love being at the cusp of someone who's about to go on a life-changing adventure. And, we don't have a lot of rituals in Western society. In cultures like Maasai culture, a kid turns 18, he has to go out, kill a lion. He's going to have an experience. It's going to change him. If someone does the PCT, it's an experience. It's going to change them. And being around someone who's about to go do that and then to be able to follow their journey and stay in touch is why they keep doing it. So trail magic also applies to life, buying a coffee for someone behind you at Starbucks or helping someone get out of a jam. I mean, it's important. And I think it's really fun to accept help from trail angels. And of course, it's even better to be a trail angel yourself.
I think that's such a cool
Incredible.
concept. I loved it. And I think that's really neat too, is like we think, because we talk a lot on the podcast about how nature teaches empathy. So we become more empathetic the more time we're spending outside because it's ingrained in us to care. Like what's alive, what's not alive, and how do we then protect those things that we love? And that's empathetic nature, compassion that we have. And I just love the idea of paying that forward. That's such a beautiful concept.
And I think, like, how nice are you when you're just out on a hike at your local trail? Like, you see another person walking, you're going to say hi to them. You're going to tell them a little bit about your experience, maybe or maybe not. And you're going to care for them in a way because you have this shared experience outside in nature. And, there's some instances in nature where you are in a dangerous situation. So you have to watch out for each other out there. And, I think nature, we are nature. So that's the other thing is sometimes we forget, but we are a part of nature. And, we've just created a little bit of a synthetic world around us, but it's not to say that we can't enjoy what nature has to offer and get outside more.
So with that said, what's next for you?
I don't know. Everybody asks me that. And I normally have this great answer. I thought I would just do speaking tour after speaking tour. And honestly, like the paper book comes out in June. I have a couple of jobs possibly lined up. Like I actually want to go work with people again, which sounds really weird, but I've been on my own in this little silo. And as a kid, I was a goalkeeper on my soccer team. I'm okay being the weirdo who takes all the blame or gets all the glory, but I like having a team in front of me. And so I have a couple of feelers out. And in the meantime, I'm really just spending a lot of time with family. And I want to help other people pursue their wild ideas. Like I've kind of done a lot of the wild ideas I've wanted to do. And now, I want to be a trail angel myself.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that, Shelby.
And somehow get paid for it. But I want to also just be a trail angel. And that's, I mean, one of the things was writing a book was really a lot of work, more than I thought. And it was kind of lonely and it was more inside than I thought. So I have been spending a massive amount of time outside in nature and a lot of time with my niece and nephews who are young, and they just see the world in a really refreshing way.
And all your surfboards in the back, by the way.
I have a lot of surfboards in the background, and I'm lucky.
I was admiring them.
Thank you.
Them.
If you ever come to San Diego, we'd be happy to take you out or set you up a surf diva who they're great teachers.
So fun.
And, I'm lucky. I live right now in a place that's falling apart, but it's on the beach. And that's the sacrifice I've made because we're really close to the water and it's joyful. And yeah, the world is changing. It's harder for people to live closer to nature. It's getting harder and harder. But there's also a lot of people investing in nature and buying land and making national parks. Just like, the people who, one of the guys who founded the North Face, and then he married a woman who was the CEO of Patagonia. They bought all this land in Chile and made it a national park. And I heard that there's a group of people, like a famous family that's bought a ton of land in the Midwest and have made bike paths. So I think, we hear a lot about the negative stuff, but there's a lot of positive stuff happening as well. And then I work with some really extraordinary individuals who are doing some wild things that I can't talk about yet, but that's also coming down the line. So I'll tell you soon.
We loved meeting you and we appreciate you coming on.
You
and everybody needs to go buy the book. And where can we follow you? Like what's your favorite poison of social?
My favorite poison right now is Instagram. You'll see a lot of pictures of me at this like deep end fitness because I can't run right now. So I'm really trying to learn different ways of interacting with nature in ways where I can't run, which is challenging for me. And I'm actually you asked what I was doing. I'm taking a science class and a math class, which sounds crazy, but I got out of college without taking any science or math. And the truth is you need a lot of science and math in the world. And I don't know. It's the first time I've been back at school since for 20 years. But you can find me on Instagram at Shelby Stanger or shelbystanger.com. I'm super easy to find, unfortunately, right now. It's like too easy. But I'm easy to find. And I have a podcast called Vitamin Joy that's been on hold, but you can listen to old episodes. It's about the intersection of mental health, adventure, and wellness. And then I do a podcast with REI called Wild Ideas Worth Living, which is available anywhere you can find podcasts. I really appreciate what you ladies are doing. So thank you for having me and finding me.
Oh, thank you. Well, you're now we're all part of the same crew. We always say like, it's like everybody's part of the biophilic solution, whether they want to be or not, they're part of nature. So let's be trail angels.
If I have one piece of advice for people listening, it's that like, if you have a wild idea, something you think is a little crazy, go do it, because you never know what's going to happen if you go. If you sit on the boat, all that's going to happen is you're going to get seasick and sunburn. So you might as well jump off the boat and go.
And have an adventure. I love it, Shelby. That's such a great point. Thank you again for your time today. This is really, really fun for us.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Jen, I feel like I got so much out of that conversation. I am inspired. I'm feeling unstuck. First off, I want to say Shelby is super cool.
Oh, yeah, she is so cool. I love chatting with her so, so much.
Not only because she's from California. I know that I've already told everybody they need to go out and buy her book, but I really highly encourage you to grab a copy either now or when paperback comes out in June. We'll put a link in our show notes. And if you're listening to the podcast, you probably already like getting outside and you're already potentially outside listening to this podcast. But if you haven't been convinced yet, you will find some amazing ideas in this book.
And our conversation with Shelby was so full of so much wisdom. At one point, she was talking about the couple who sailed to French Polynesia after years of meticulous planning. And she said, "You can let yourself be unready forever if you let yourself." And I love that so much.
I did too. And I think that line would resonate with anybody who struggles with perfectionism. Speaking of which, I also love talking to Shelby about how sometimes it's great to try something new that you're stuck at. I don't think many people pick up new hobbies with the expectation that they're going to excel or turn it into a side hustle when it's really just like letting go and enjoying it. I think she said, you can suck.
Yeah.
You can do something that you're not good at. It's okay.
Embrace the suck, which I love. And I'm also sensing a common theme here of just generally letting ourselves be more human, which I love, and seeking out more awe and adventure in our daily lives and getting out of our own way.
Yes, and getting out of our own head. I couldn't agree more with everything that you've said and what she said. And I say, let's kickstart that process. Everybody needs to get outside in nature in big and small ways.
Okay, so we have tons of links in our show notes for anyone who wants to buy Shelby's book, listen to the podcast, and learn more about her amazing work.
Talk soon, Jen.
Bye, Monica.